There remains two separate and distinct versions of what is reality regarding the U.S. and Israel war against Iran. One side saying that they have all the cards, they have all the time. The other side saying they have all the cards and they have all the time. And then kind of in between is the reality on the ground. And as always, we're going to try to figure out what is the reality on the ground, despite who may be wanting to spin this or that. And we have a great person back with us again today to try and figure all that out. Because he lives on the reality, and that's Jeremy Scahill, who is a journalist at Dropsite News, which is an investigative news organization dedicated to exposing the crimes of the powerful and the truth, which is why I love that channel and watch it all the time. Refer to it. He's also the kind of guy we just like to have here, Deep Dive, because we also like the truth. Welcome back, Jeremy.
Feeling is mutual, Danny. Great to be with you.
Well, listen, I'm always eager when we get you on the show because you're talking to everybody, U.S., Iranian side, and you're not just demonizing and characterizing the Iranian side. You actually treat them like a country that has a perspective, whether we like them or not. It doesn't even make any difference. And what matters is what are they saying and how might this come to an end? And one of the first things I wanted to talk about today is because the oil prices have risen starting when the market opened up today for a number of reasons, but one of which is because Iran says the Strait of Hormuz will not return to its previous state and accuses the U.S. of undermining trust. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, there's a couple things going on here, Danny. On the one hand, you have this narrative being promoted by the White House that, you know, Iran is on the verge of capitulation and that, you know, the Iranians have put forward a new plan that's being reviewed by President Trump and his national security team. And on the other hand, you have the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, on this tour around the world. In fact, he was meeting with Vladimir Putin today and also with the head of Russian military intelligence. Prior to that, he was in Pakistan as well as in Oman. While he was in Pakistan, this didn't get much attention. The day that Araghchi leaves Pakistan, the Pakistanis announced that they're effective immediately going to start authorizing widespread land transit for third-party countries to transport goods into Iran. This is a huge deal for Iran, given that the U.S. claims that it's strangling the country right now. And so in the Strait of Hormuz, what we've seen is that President Trump is saying that he's doing sort of incalculable damage to the Iranians. By all estimates, though, the military blockade has generally been a strategic failure, and Iran has showed an ability using asymmetric tactics to really maintain its control of the Strait of Hormuz. And the bottom line is the Iranians are saying they are not going to go into broader negotiations with the United States as long as that U.S. military naval blockade remains in place. Essentially, it's a game of chicken right now. And over the past week, it's been President Trump that's been blinking, you know, announcing J.D. Vance is on his way to Islamabad. Turns out that was false. Then he says Jared and Steve are on their way to Islamabad. Turns out that was false. The Iranians are saying consistently, we're not going to meet with you until you lift this naval blockade. Trump and the White House are saying, oh, the Iranians are lying. They say that in public, but there's going to be meetings. And the reality is, wheels up on the Iranian plane, and then it goes back to Trump, and Trump says, oh, I decided I'm going to cancel Jared and Steve going because it's not worth the 18-hour flight, and the Iranians can call me if they want to talk. Bottom line is that the Iranians are showing an incredible ability to face down against a far superior U.S. naval force and just nation state in terms of military power and maintain control over the strait.
And look, you know, what are the Iranians saying about this on again, off again, this claim that this delegation is going with those, other than the words that never seem to materialize? But one would imagine that they would have been made aware that if there were actually inbound diplomats heading from the United States into Pakistan.
You know, I was told right when the announcement became public that Abbas Araghchi was going to be headed to Pakistan, I spoke to a senior Iranian official, and he said, this is going to be bilateral discussions with the Pakistanis, and the purpose of it is essentially dual-fold. On the one hand, we're going to brief them on Iran's position on what a permanent end to the war in a negotiated format would look like, and they broke that down into pieces. And this is being reported on the U.S. side with a lot of spin by Barak Ravid at Axios and other sort of media outlets the Trump administration likes to leak to, as the Iranians have sent the U.S. a new proposal. That's not what happened. What the Iranians have done is they've said there's going to be a multi-phased plan that we'll accept, which is first you have to lift the naval blockade and actually force the Israelis into a real ceasefire in Lebanon, or there aren't going to be any talks. And they said once that happens, once you lift that naval blockade, at least temporarily, and you force the Israelis to actually stop the killing in Lebanon, not just pretend they have a ceasefire, we'll do negotiations, and then we can talk about a way to fully open up the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians just days ago were willing to do that until Donald Trump came out and violated what the Pakistanis had told the Iranians he agreed to, which was to temporarily stop the naval blockade so we could have real negotiations. So the Iranians are saying once they then negotiate terms for a temporary reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, only then will they move to a broader negotiation framework. On the other hand, they were talking about other bilateral issues with the Pakistanis. So it seems like what happened is that Arachi goes there, he briefs the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis then, in whatever version of what Arachi told them, is presented to the White House. I'm sure the Pakistanis have spun it in a way where they think it's catering to Trump's ego. Look, the Iranians are putting this on the table. My understanding from Iranian officials is they basically just explained in greater detail their position as it's been from the beginning on the nuclear enrichment issue, but then also said that they have these conditions to actually restart negotiations. So when Trump was saying, oh, J.D. Vance is on his way, or Steve Witkoff is on his way, we were reporting in real time that the Iranians were saying, we're not going to meet with them at all. The White House kept saying, oh, that's a lie. The meetings are going to happen. Consistently, whatever you think about Iran, it's been pretty clear that the Iranians generally say what they mean. And if they say it's not going to happen in terms of these meetings, it doesn't happen. So, you know, I mean, look, you even had the German chancellor today, Friedrich Merz, gave a speech in front of students. And he said, and this is a guy who's been really kind of a poodle to Donald Trump in many ways. I mean, he sort of bent the knee right away with Donald Trump and was, you know, supportive of almost everything the U.S. did in Iran at the beginning, even though he claims he was skeptical privately. He comes out today and he says that the Iranians are humiliating the United States and that they are out negotiating the United States, and said that if he had known this was going to go on for 5 or 6 weeks, that he would have expressed more skepticism at the beginning to Donald Trump. You know, so I think the world is realizing right now that Donald Trump's sort of narrative is really flailing in terms of its credibility, and that the Iranians are now pivoting to kind of plan B. They're certainly going down plan A, which is I think they do genuinely want a negotiated resolution to this war. But plan B is, let's talk to the Russians. Let's talk to the Chinese. Let's look at what an alternative arrangement for the Strait of Hormuz looks like if Donald Trump decides he wants to essentially walk away from this right now and declare some sort of victory and then say, well, the Strait of Hormuz is someone else's problem. The Iranians are showing that they have very powerful friends. You know, for the foreign minister to be meeting directly with Vladimir Putin, he didn't just meet with the foreign minister, Lavrov. And Putin comes out and he says that we are going to help to act in the interests of Iran and the region to bring this war to an end. And he goes out of his way to say, like Iran, we are going to strengthen our strategic relationship. Danny, you know, because you've talked about this before on this program, the Iranians, it works both ways. The Iranians also supplied Shahed drones to Russia for the war in Ukraine. I think it's quite clear that the Russians and also the Chinese, to one degree or another, have been supplying the Iranians with intelligence since the United States attacked on February 28th. If there isn't a ceasefire, if there's a resumption of the war, or if it resumes to the status quo where war could happen at any moment, I think what the Iranians are messaging right now is that they're pulling Russia much closer into their sphere, and Russia very publicly staked out a position in support of the Iranians today.
And to what extent would the Russians increase their engagement here? Because I mean, I think it's pretty evident they definitely don't want to get into a war with the United States at all if they can avoid it. And they still are trying to, I mean, they're still having a whale of a time with the war in Ukraine, as a matter of fact. Maybe we can touch on that in a second. But what does getting closer look like in terms of specific help for the Iranians?
Look, if the U.S. wants to tighten its sanctions regime, the Iranians are certainly going to need economic support from Russia. But I think there's something else at play here, Danny. The Iranians have said from the beginning that they are not going to allow the United States to take custody of their 60% highly enriched uranium. They're believed to have somewhere in the ballpark of 1,000 pounds of enriched uranium to a 60% degree. Just to put this in context, back in the 2015 nuclear deal under Barack Obama, there were 25,000 pounds of enriched uranium, but most of it was enriched at a lower level, and that the Iranians then transferred to a third country. Who was that third country? Russia. Almost all, by most estimates, around 98% of the highly enriched uranium, which was only enriched to 20% at that time in 2015, was shipped to Russia. And so Russia has a long history in working with the United States and Iran on the nuclear issue, and in fact was the custodian of Iran's enriched uranium under the JCPOA in 2015. While the Iranians are saying that they won't transfer their highly enriched uranium anywhere, certainly not the United States, you get the sense that part of what might be happening here is that the Iranians are exploring what it might look like if there actually was good faith negotiation on the nuclear issue to pull Russia back closer into the fold, to see if Russia might be able to play a role in a multifaceted negotiation where you might actually see the transfer of highly enriched uranium come back into play. Now, no Iranian official I have spoken to has said, yes, that's an option. But the way they talk about it is to reiterate that they feel they're going into this with flexibility if they believe that Donald Trump is actually capable of making a deal, which is a big wild card here.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. If we were talking rational thing here, that would be a rational path that deserves to be explored if that can get all of this off the table. Because the Trump administration has said from the outset, and even though the objectives have shifted around, one of the things that's always there is that Iran can't have a nuke. Iran can't have a nuke ad infinitum. So if you can get that solved, that could potentially provide a way out to give some kind of face to Trump to get this off the table, if that could be arranged. But then you have to have some kind of confidence from the Iranian side that will come anywhere close to living up to any kind of a deal that would involve the Russians. And I would imagine, and you tell me, I would imagine that Russia would almost equally have to have some confidence that the U.S., because the last thing I think they want to do is have egg on their face that they're going down a negotiating path and all of a sudden it collapses because we go Trump on them again. I mean, how do you see that dynamic?
No, it's total crazy town, Danny. I mean, in fact, some of the Iranians I'm talking to, I mean, much of their negotiating team and their leadership have PhDs in a variety of disciplines. And sometimes when I'm talking to Iranian officials, they sort of say, look, it's dealing with people like Steve Witkoff, who's a total ignoramus when it comes to the technical issues here, or Jared Kushner. The Iranians just view him as, you might as well have Benjamin Netanyahu sitting at the table, to the point where the Iranians said, they say we're in disarray. We sat there with them in Islamabad, and we openly witnessed that there was a split between J.D. Vance on the one hand, and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff on the other hand. In fact, the Iranians are turning it around and saying, you say we're in disarray. Look at you. Look what's playing out in public. You have a president of the United States that can't even tell you who's on an airplane that he supposedly dispatched, where he's literally saying to the press, JD is on a plane, and it's completely false and demonstrably so. So, on this issue of Russia, though, I think this is actually really important for us to examine. I think if there was real negotiation, you would see the Russians come into play, perhaps even the Chinese. I hear a lot of Iranians talking about a whole other sort of semi-secret, not very public track where the Iranians are doing a lot of talking to the Chinese. The Omanis, for decades, have been the trusted mediator between the U.S. and Iran on the nuclear issue. The Omanis got pushed out because the U.S. used the Omanis as a cover to do the surprise launch of the war on February 28th. The Omani foreign minister comes to D.C. a day before the war, and he meets with J.D. Vance, and he comes out and he says, and Trump and others, and he comes out and he says, I think we're heading toward a reasonable deal. And then they turn around and they launch this war. So they really spit in the face of one of the most trusted mediators on this. But Arachi was just in Oman. He's now in Russia. It could be that the Iranians are preparing to try to say, look, let's bring serious adults back to the table to have real talks. But the bottom line here, Danny, and I'll reiterate it, what we're seeing is a total pyramid of lies being constructed in terms of the narrative. It is a psychological operation that is being fed to Trump-aligned media that is suggesting that the Iranians are sort of on the verge of capitulation. What has happened here is the Iranians are saying, okay, you want to be erratic? You want to keep lying? Here are the rules of the game. First thing, that military blockade needs to be lifted. Then we can talk about a solution for the Strait of Hormuz. Then if you're serious and you're willing to send not real estate golf buddies, but actual technical experts, we're willing to put everything on the table for a negotiation. In the event that doesn't happen, Russia, China, and other nations in the region, Iran wants to make alternative arrangements with them that is a parallel to sort of what's happening with the challenge to the supremacy of the US dollar. I think Iran is also trying to repair some relations in the Persian Gulf. All that goes up in flames, though, if the US and Israel start bombing again. What I'm hearing from Iranians is we're going to see potential sabotage of undersea cables, which could mean huge disruption of internet service, huge disruption of commerce. Anyone can go and look it up on open source. What percentage of internet traffic actually goes through these undersea cables? It's quite significant if you look at it. An IRGC-affiliated news organization published maps of the undersea cables recently in the region with a not too thinly veiled implication that those may be targeted in the event the US and Israelis resume the war. The Iranians have said, if you attack our infrastructure, we're going to hit 4 times the number of targets in the Persian Gulf as you attack inside of Iran. The stakes are very, very high here, and Donald Trump is playing with fire, not just with regional security, but with the global economy and also with the standing of the U.S. in the world.
Yeah, and I'm going to get to some of that in a second, but I don't want to get too far away from something you said. You've mentioned a couple of times already here, and I think it's really important to try and understand where the Iranian side are. You mentioned those negotiations that were mediated by Oman in late February, right before this thing started off. And I'll never forget that day on CBS News when the Omani foreign minister went on and said, we have the outlines of a deal, actually an incredible deal that I didn't think the Iranian side would even agree to, that they said they would be willing to go to zero enrichment and that they would not have any reprocessed material at all. They had some safeguards that would eventually take what they had down to zero and then not have any enrichment. And then they would put on the table to discuss long-range missiles and support to their regional allies, which I didn't even think was even possible. But those were things that were handed over on which should have prevented war from coming on. But now then, you said a second ago where their view is on the nuclear question now. Once you get the Strait of Hormuz issues figured and you can get to that, how would you characterize the difference between what they said before the war started and where they are now on a resolution?
I get the sense that even with everything that's happened, the assassination of the supreme leader of Iran, the assassination of the senior political and military leadership of Iran, the bombing of its infrastructure, the killing of more than 3,000 Iranians, that Iran still maintains that it wants a diplomatic resolution to this. And what I'm consistently hearing is the day that they start sending serious technical experts is the day that we will start to take seriously that they want to actually make a deal. It's not in the Iranian state's interest. And I think that we have to always be careful about the cartoonized version of Iran that we read in much of the Western press. It's not in the Iranian state's interest to have a state of war and sanctions and siege extend on for months on end. I think the Iranians are committed to ensuring that they restore deterrence and that they not sign away their sovereignty. But I think that on this issue of nuclear, in some ways, I think they feel that they have an ability to be more flexible because they've shown a tactical weapon that in some ways is more potent than the idea of Iran potentially developing a nuclear weapon. And that is its ability with very limited resources, relatively speaking, to control the Strait of Hormuz and disrupt the global economy. So I would say that if Trump and the United States continue this hard line, these maximalist demands, what they're going to get from the Iranian side is just tactical negotiations aimed at ending the siege and ending the war while Iran retains its deterrence, including in the form of domination of the Strait of Hormuz without a U.S. role whatsoever or any negotiation on it. If the U.S., though, backs away from it, I really do get the sense from Iranian diplomats and officials that they would love to have a comprehensive discussion to try to reach a non-aggression pact ultimately with the United States. I don't get the sense that the Iranians have any grand animosity toward the American people at all. I really think that
no,
path
I'm
would
sorry,
be there.
you're definitely wrong there, because Lindsey Graham told us, and Senator Kennedy said that they're religious Nazis and that they just want to kill us all. So you must be mistaken.
Yeah. I mean, this is in all the, for 25 years, I've done, reporting from the other side of the barrel of the American gun. And, what I generally have done is I've talked to people who live on the other side of our bombs, because I think as an American journalist, it's important for the American people to understand the real world impact that our policies are having. And so that, if there's one thing that's run through all my work, it's been that I've tried to go and look at what happens on the other side of the barrel of our guns. And in the case of, Iran, it's what I sense is that there is astonishment at the level of incompetence and maliciousness that they are facing right now. But on the other hand, very positive references to other negotiation points over the past 30 years. And, Iran is an advanced civilization with brilliant people. I mean, just look at their capacity in the propaganda battle space, explosive media, and the Lego ads that they're making.
That's crazy.
The ingenuity in their weapons industry, the science and technology. And, I even was just looking recently at some architectural projects in Iran. I mean, this is a remarkable civilization that I think in many ways would be a natural ally of the United States. It'd be a natural ally. So what we have here is actually a possibility too, where Trump could probably sign business deals that he believes would benefit even his family in Iran, but not under these conditions. The Iranian tone was so different prior to February 28th, to the point where Iranian diplomats were saying, we felt that American officials were even shocked at what we were putting on the table at times. So, I don't mean to put rose-tinted glasses on here and pretend that everyone's going to be singing Kumbaya in a few weeks. But what I'm saying is that I think the opportunity is there, if the U.S. operates with any good faith, to resolve this in a way where the United States can feel like it's made itself safer in the world, and where the Iranians' sovereignty is respected.
Well, if that's the hope, Secretary of State Marco Rubio would seem to put a little bit of a wet rag on that hope, as he's explaining how he sees this idea about getting to step one, which is to get the Strait of Hormuz opened up.
On Saturday, the president canceled the talks in Islamabad. He said just 10 minutes later, the Iranians made a new offer on paper, and it was better.
If what they mean by opening the straits is, yes, the straits are opened as long as you coordinate with Iran, get our permission, or we'll blow you up, and you pay us, that's not opening the straits. Those are international waterways. They cannot normalize, nor can we tolerate them trying to normalize a system in which the Iranians decide who gets to use an international waterway and how much you have to pay them to use it.
That's pretty rich with irony here, that you're lecturing Iran on the international law and the waterways as we have a blockade on them, and we started a war against them. How is that received?
No, I mean, these people are living in la la land. I mean, especially Marco Rubio with these comments on the Strait of Hormuz. There is no condition under which the United States is going to emerge from this in dominant control of the Strait of Hormuz. It is not physically possible, and it is not going to happen. And what has repeatedly been proven over and over is that every time the United States claims that it has decimated or obliterated Iran, or that it's not going to stand for X or Y from the Iranian regime, Iran shows that it has an ability to counter the United States in asymmetric ways, and at times in symmetric ways. And so, these people are all going to have egg on their face until the hubris goes away. I'm not implying at all that I think that there is going to be some friendly resolution anytime soon. I want to emphasize that I think that what's happening right now is contrary even to the national interest of the United States. This is not making the United States more safe, what's happening right now. It's making the United States less safe. It's sending a message to countries around the world that the only real deterrence against this is the one that's held by Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un and the Kim family for decades in North Korea, that you actually are in possession of a nuclear weapon. But there is a window right now, and the Iranians have shown a lot of patience and flexibility. And I think that what they've presented to the Pakistanis that is being rebranded by Trump media world as a new proposal is actually practical. Lift the military blockade, which the Iranians say is itself an act of war and is illegal. Let's negotiate on the Strait of Hormuz. And if we can do that in good faith, then everything can be on the table for broader negotiations. That remains their position.
And you know, when Rubio says something like that, I mean, just take a look at this graphic here with this map. I mean, you can see when Iran has all of that, I don't know the exact number, somewhere around 800 miles of coastline from its southern border all the way up through to the Karg Island areas, especially. How do you think that you can just tell them they're not going to have any play on this, and that we are? Just the geography, it just doesn't seem to be working for that.
No, I mean, look, you were career military, not me, but you know, just basically looking at a map, looking at what would be required in terms of U.S. naval assets. I mean, it's outrageously dumb what Marco Rubio is saying, but also the nations of the world don't want that, and it's impractical. But also, Iran will always be able to raise the specter of disruption by doing very minimal action. So this would be unsustainable and would subject also American troops to grave danger. Not to mention the fact, imagine the hubris that the United States believes that it has the right to send its warships halfway around the world, and they're going to determine what ships get to go through this waterway, that the only two literal states are Oman and Iran. You know, who do we think we are? You know, I mean, it really is. It's imperial hubris, and it's going to get more Americans killed. And it also is just making the United States look absolutely idiotic in the world.
And plus, it's also not going to work. I want to go to a couple of things that your drop site has been talking about here lately. You said, well, White House, or drop site news said, while White House officials claim Iran presented the U.S. with a new proposal over the weekend and pushed this narrative through its preferred media outlets, senior Iranian officials told Dropsite's News' Jeremy Scahill the characterization was false, which also I think you had something written on that. What can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, you know, what keeps happening here, Danny, is that you know, there will be some back channel communications that take place between the United States and Iran. And, you know, I'll give you one concrete example. When the whole Strait of Hormuz is going to reopen thing happened, you know, a week or so ago, what I'm told is that there was a very carefully choreographed series of events that were supposed to take place. The Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, was going to post a tweet, which he did, that said that the Strait of Hormuz is now going to be open to all commercial traffic, and that Donald Trump was then going to announce that he was extending the ceasefire, and that was going to pave the way for, and lifting the naval blockade, and that was going to pave the way for a second round of talks in Islamabad. So Araghchi puts up his tweet. He says it's open. Trump responds initially with a tweet that thanks Iran and actually refers to it as the Strait of Iran. And so we're watching this and we're thinking, okay, this is going to happen. There's going to be talks. But then somebody gets to Trump, or Trump is watching media coverage, or Netanyahu calls the White House, or, you know, Pete Hegseth, who knows? But moments later, then Trump's like, oh no, I'm extending the ceasefire, but I'm keeping the naval blockade in place. Well, that's not what the Iranians had been told by the Pakistanis. The deal was that wasn't the choreographed way it was supposed to roll out. So the Iranians then go back and they say, everything goes back to the status quo because Trump is saying that he's going to continue this illegal naval blockade. So what the story that we have today is looking at the TikTok of events that have unfolded over the past 48 or 72 hours, where Trump got utterly humiliated by claiming that J.D. Vance and Kushner and Witkoff were, you know, on airplanes on the way to Islamabad. and the Iranians, left town, and then Trump had to kind of spin a narrative. And so what's happened today is that Axios, the Wall Street Journal, other news outlets that the Trump administration likes to leak to, have been floating this story that the Iranians have somehow submitted some new proposal that Trump says is like, almost there, but not quite good enough yet, and that the U.S. has to review it and get back to them. And plus, we don't know who we're even dealing with because the Iranians don't even know who's in charge. The reality is that Iran has been very clear in what it's been doing. And right now, Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister, is in the midst of briefing Iranian allies and mediators on exactly what Iran's positions are. So, we're looking at an enormous amount of spin. And I think, Hassan Ahmadian, one of the most prominent Iranian analysts, told me this morning that we're witnessing a campaign of what he called cognitive warfare against Iran by Trump and the U.S. media aligned with him, where they are essentially accusing Iran of being in total disarray, when the reality is that out in public, we see it's the Trump administration that is in a quite a serious state of chaos and contradiction.
Now, speaking of Dr. Ahmadian, that's in one of the other things you have put here on Drops Out There. I wanted to talk about two specific things. There was a list of 7 you had on here, but 2 of them really struck me. Is that one, we'll look at it first, that he says Iran believes time is on its side, and it says they think that they have the 3-part strategic advantage because of the 3 M's. Can you tell us what they mean by that?
Yeah, munitions, markets, and the midterm elections. The Iranians are carefully monitoring the stockpile of interceptors in Israel. They understand, I think, in a quite sophisticated way, potentially even with help from the Russians and Chinese, the extent of the damage that's been done to U.S. defense capabilities in the GCC Gulf countries. They're certainly monitoring the U.S. military movements. But the Iranians are well aware of the supply side issues that the U.S. is facing in getting enough munitions to effectively counter Iranian ballistic missile and drone attacks. At the same time, the Iranians over the past nearly 3 weeks have said that they're restocking their own weapon supplies, that they're repairing damaged sites, that they're clearing out areas where they're able to launch some of their more sophisticated ballistic missiles. They're confident that they have enough fast boats to counter U.S. threats in the Strait of Hormuz. So on the munitions issue, they feel that the U.S. and Israel are very vulnerable in the event of a resumption of war, and that there's a lot of soft targets throughout the Persian Gulf that the Iranians are going to hit, especially if the U.S. and Israel are taking out their infrastructure. There are a ton of soft oil targets in the GCC countries that Iran stopped short of striking in the last time around. Of course, the markets is another big issue. We see what's happening with the price of oil. We see what's happening in terms of the global economic impact. The shipment of fertilizer around the world is going to have a multi-month, if not multi-year effect on output of crops and food supplies around the world. Europe is in a panic right now about what's going to happen with its own natural gas and oil supplies. Gasoline in Germany is at times top $9 a gallon. I mean, it's astonishing what the world is facing right now. And the Iranians believe that in terms of the market conditions, that Trump and the very clear insider trading that's going on right now, that cycle can't last forever, and that it's going to cause a significant degradation of the global economy, and it's going to start really impacting the American economy soon. And then finally, the midterm elections. Iranians are actually quite astute students of the U.S. political system. Speaking to a lot of Iranian professors some of whom have their PhDs from the United States that are experts in American studies, are very closely watching what might happen with the War Powers Act going forward, the way that Israel has become toxic to large portions of the Trump base and the MAGA world. They're following the split between Tucker Carlson and people from the neocon wing of the Trump MAGA movement. They're paying close attention to how Israel in particular has penetrated the electoral cycle of Democrats. And I think that they feel that the midterm elections has made this war very, very toxic to be a supporter of. And so the Iranians say they have these 3 M's on their side, mitigating in their favor if the U.S. does decide that it wants to not have any kind of a diplomatic resolution soon.
And of course, going back to that conversation with Dr. Ahmadian, Number 7 is the one that got my biggest concern there, because it says, I think the Iranians will not sit on their hands watching the United States harass and seize their ships. They would rather go for a war. That's that big part I want to get your view on here. If there's no breakthrough in the next week, I think the escalation will happen. I expect the United States to increase pressure on Iran militarily, but the Iranians will go heavier this time. Why does Dr. Ahmadian, number one, why does he think that something could happen next week? But number 2, that statement there, they would rather go for a war than to continue on with the harassment. Can you tell us what their thinking is on that?
Yeah, I mean, what he's saying, and I didn't get into all of the contours of this, but the way that conversation started with Dr. Ahmadian and I this morning was he was saying the Iranians that he's speaking to. This is a very prominent Iranian analyst. In fact, he is probably the most prominent Iranian analyst in the entire Arabic-speaking world. He's on primetime Al Jazeera Arabic every single night, often battling on panel discussions. 5 or 6 other guests. This would be the equivalent of being on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox at the same time. That's how prominent and trusted he is, and he's become an absolute superstar in Iran because of his ability to engage in combat on primetime TV on the most watched channels. And so, what he's saying is that the Iranians are not going to accept the status quo continuing in the Strait of Hormuz. And what he was talking about was the U.S. attacking or trying to interdict or redirect or even seize Iranian vessels. And he was predicting that the Iranians are going to start more directly confronting on a military level with the fast boats and other means, U.S. military actions in the Strait of Hormuz. That was one part of this. But so when he's saying that they would choose war over something else, he's saying that what the U.S. is doing right now is pushing right up against the envelope's edge of acceptability for the Iranian state, where they will start to determine if we don't push back against what we perceive to be the bully is going to keep punching us until we're on the ground. And so what Dr. Ahmadian is saying is he has a sense from Iranian officials that they are going to start pushing back if it doesn't stop in the Strait of Hormuz on a military level. And what I think he's saying in the broader sense is that, Iran, and this was told to me by Iranian officials, they still believe the most plausible scenario is that Trump and Israel resume some form of military attack. What I've heard is a calculation that Trump may delude himself into believing that 3 days or 5 days more of heavy bombing is going to soften up the Iranians. I think that is next to impossible to imagine happening. What is more likely, and this is what Dr. Ahmadian I think was referring to, is if Trump thinks he's going to be able to just throw a bunch of sucker punches and then all of a sudden the Iranians are going to be punch drunk and say, now we're going to accept your terms. What's going to happen is the Iranians are going to immediately respond, and they're going to try to do it in a very, very extreme manner. That's why they're talking about 4 times the targets that are hit with us right out of the gates. The lesson Iran has learned through this is that the only way to stand up to the United States is to stand up to the United States. And what they're saying is if they slap us, we punch, at our capacity. And I think that that's what Dr. Ahmadian is saying. Everyone, I think, hopes that doesn't happen. I don't think any sane person wants this war to go on. But what is very, very clear is there will not be a capitulation. The Iranians view this as an existential war. They are not going to surrender.
There has been, and I'm going to show you here in a second, just kind of how the mainstream media view of this is here in the United States, and it continues to look at Iran as kind of like with contempt and disgust, and like these little guys here, we'll show them a thing or two. That's what we're saying publicly. I'm going to get to that in a second, but privately, from what I've talked to a number of folks that have contacts all the way down to the front lines and all the way up into the Pentagon. And it seems that there's one of 3 things that President Trump is considering. One is to just say, all right, this is stupid. I'm just going to walk away. Some version of that. We're not going to attack anything else. We're just going to let the Arabs figure out what's going to go on with the strait, and we're just going to claim victory and walk away. That's one. Number 2 is that they'll, as the fear is, they'll resume and try another big thing. We're going to hit the energy and the bridges and all the stuff that Trump has said. The third option is that he may say, all right, let's do a light version. Let's just go and hit some things here on the edges and blow up a few things here and just kind of, try to go up the escalation ladder a little bit smaller and see what that does. But my question is to you, from your conversation, will the Iranian side view that as the lower level and have a lower level response, or is it one bomb falls and they go for this 4X deal?
No, I think if there's any resumption of, of intense bombing, I mean, the stuff that's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, what I'm hearing is it's getting to a point where Iran is contemplating a more robust military response aimed at the actions in the Strait of Hormuz. This wouldn't be like starting to attack Gulf countries, but there could be attacks on U.S. action happening in the Strait of Hormuz. If the U.S. and Israel start bombing leadership in Iran, which I think is also being contemplated by the White House, perhaps killing some other senior figures, saying that they're not capitulating fast enough, or if they do start attacking infrastructure, even if they claim they're doing it in a limited window, I think it's going to result in some very serious Iranian retaliatory strikes. I think they're going to go tit for tat. I think if the U.S. starts knocking out bridges and energy infrastructure, we're going to see attacks on energy infrastructure in Gulf countries. I think that's pretty clear. One thing, you mentioned this, that I'm going to bring something up with you. Joe Kent, of course, who resigned as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, posted on X, roughly 2 weeks ago, or maybe 10 days ago, essentially what you were just saying there, Danny, which was that there's this third option for Trump. He could essentially, just walk away. And, I've heard that also from other American sources, and the Iranians are aware of that, that discourse. And there's a way in which that could be, on a strategic level, maybe one of Trump's smartest moves, and perhaps one of the most difficult for the Iranians to navigate. If Trump essentially just said, we've weakened them so tremendously, and we're going to let NATO and the EU and Gulf Arab countries figure out the Strait of Hormuz, as you indicated, and they then say, well, we're going to ratchet up the sanctions on Iran. We're going to intensify the economic warfare. This is essentially what Netanyahu has been sort of talking about recently, that what we really need to do now is strangle the Iranian state into submission so that there's an uprising. They return back to this thing that they don't want to talk about anymore, but trying to essentially starve and target the Iranian people into submission so that there is internal strife again inside of Iran. In some ways, that scenario would be the most difficult for Iran to navigate, because right now there's an enormous amount of global goodwill toward Iran. The perception that Iran is standing up to the United States and Israel is a widely held view among large swaths of the global population. If you're an American living in a MAGA media bubble, you're not aware of that. But Iran's defiance in the face of the superpower and Israel attacking it and refusing to capitulate has elevated Iran's standing in many, many nations around the world. And so if the thing kind of peters out, and it's no longer front page news, and what's happening is that the U.S. is turning up the economic heat on Iran, intensifying the sanctions, that creates a very bad problem for the Iranian government on a strategic level. And that's the perspective I hear from kind of people in the Trump orbit who are not insane, which is a diminishing quantity, as you know.
Yeah, there's not that many. I'm going to go to that point I said here in a second, but you brought up something, and I just wondered, have you seen any reaction on the Iranian side to Mark Thiessen's piece in the Washington Post last week, to where he's like saying, yeah, look, if there are two factions inside of Iran and then one's not on our side and the one doesn't want to deal with us, let's just go kill those guys. How was that received in Iran?
Yeah, I mean, no, the Iranians are just always waiting with bated breath to read the words of discredited Bush era neocons. I mean, they're basically just refreshing the page all day long, waiting for what these guys. Look, I think
this was
retweeted by Trump. Look,
yeah.
But this though speaks to something else, which is that this is the propaganda narrative that Dr. Ahmadian was talking about. The notion that Iran is in disarray, that the IRGC has sort of seized control. There were reports that, or claims that Arachi had been placed under house arrest, that Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament, had been placed under house arrest, that even the
posted that.
The Supreme Leader himself, has been incapacitated, and anyway, I don't think that anyone who is saying these things knows anything about how the Iranian state is structured, like the United States, Iran is a system of institutions with very clear lines of succession, not just for individuals, but for institutions. And they built a series of parallel institutions. They have a conventional armed forces, a military, and they have an IRGC. They have their own intelligence ministry, and then they have intelligence wing of the IRGC. Going all the way down their structure, they have a system of parallel institutions, parallel leaders, and a clear chain of command. They have a Supreme National Security Council that is populated by highly educated and veteran officials of various components and echelons of the Iranian state. Yes, it has massive differences to how the U.S. Does its decision-making. Yes, under their laws, the supreme leader, who is a religious authority in the country, has the right of vetoing decisions. But what I'm told is that at every level of decision-making that has taken place since these negotiations began, and in fact, since the war began, there was a clear set of how Iran would respond in the event of this person being killed, of this entity being bombed, of these forces being incapacitated, and they delegated authority much further down. But I think that what has become clear over and over again is that Iran is in fact operating according to its own succession plans and is coming with a much more cogent message to these meetings than the United States is. It doesn't discern. I don't care, like, if somebody's watching right now and they are the most militant opponent that they can imagine in their own heads of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they want that regime to be gone. It does you a disservice to lie to yourself about what the realities are. And I don't think it does a service to a democratic society to pretend that Jesse Waters and Sean Hannity are sort of telling the truth about Iran. Let's look at the facts as they are. And the facts right now, Danny, constitute Trump and his administration using the media to spin a tale that is going to cause shock when the realities come through, and that is that Iran meant what it said. So let's have an honest discussion about it. You don't have to be pro or anti-Iran at all. You just have to be pro-facts. And the reality is that Iran is far less damaged institutionally than the American people are being led to believe by Trump or much of the Western media that is in his ecosystem.
And let me go now in the last bit of time we have here into that, what could be coming next. And I want to show, first of all, there's a lot of information out here that over the past 2 weeks since this ceasefire started, that the scale of the U.S. military buildup around the Middle East just went to unprecedented levels, in some capacities even larger than before the war started on February 28th. And pretty much everything, all the weapons we expended have all been replenished. Interceptors, offensive cruise missiles, Tomahawks, several other kinds of categories apparently have all been replenished, and allegedly the same with the Israeli side as well. Now, let me show you just one example here. I could have picked many of what a retired naval captain, a guy named Nash, was on Fox News. And you can just hear the condescension to what he's looking about these little Iranians. Here's how they view it.
Now that the Ayatollah Khamenei was killed and his son is put in his place, that has weakened that one element. Got the IRGC, and then you've got the people. And the people may have a card to play, and that is a widespread revolution with the regular Iranian army and the regular Iranian navy, which are conscripted, they're drafted. So if those elements were to turn against the IRGC, then you would have a civil war backed by a popular uprising.
So what do you say? Is there a chance that there could be this split and it turn into a civil war and those people could finally rise up and be our boots on the ground?
I don't see any evidence to suggest that anything remotely resembling that would happen, particularly during this intense period when the United States and Israel are attacking. I mean, look what happened when, the totally discredited son of the deposed Shah visited Europe recently. He had to start giving speeches literally inside of a glass box, to hide from people who were coming and just denouncing him and ridiculing him. And he's the one that is advocating that position that the retired, military officer was just espousing there on Fox News. we're whistling past the graveyard here, Danny, with these narratives, and it does nobody any favors to engage in this fantasy. We were told a big series of lies about how the Iranian people were going to rise up, and I think the Israelis cooked a lot of intelligence. They put it in front of Trump. The people that should be held accountable for this are the officials that remain in power in the United States in an intelligence or military capacity and don't speak truth to power. But Israel, I think, has an unprecedented ability to influence what is considered to be reliable intelligence. But I don't think that we should go too far in saying that all of this is, because of Israel. Danny, I'm sure from your time in the U.S. military, you have a lot of guys who have spent decades waiting for the day when they're going to avenge the 1979 revolution, the taking of the American embassy, who have viewed for their entire military careers Iran as their great nemesis, on the covert and overt battlefields. And I think that Trump was really fluffed up to believe that, historical greatness was upon him, that he was going to be the guy to forever change this and avenge, this. And so you have that mixed up with Trump family business, with the cooked up Israeli intelligence, with the deference to the Israeli agenda, and with these ideas that have been placed in Trump's head that his strategy is actually working. It's like the parable story of the emperor has no clothes. I mean, Trump right now, I think he sometimes really is being told, your strategy is working. You just need to do this and then they're going to fold. The Iranians aren't folding, and someone needs to actually be able to speak that truth to Donald Trump.
And so let me ask you a final question here, because you maybe uniquely are paying attention to both sides, maybe as much or more than anybody in the Western world. Given what you're hearing from Dr. Madian, for example, about this could potentially turn back into a hot war next week, and it could just turn what the first 40 days and make it even bigger flames and deeply increase the potential cost to the entire global economy, not just the United States. On top of what's already happened here. And you're talking to those in the United States, and you see what some of the people are saying militarily, the actual people are saying behind the scenes about what is and isn't capable. You see this reports by CNN, about New York Times, about how many weapons we've already used, how few we have left. We just can't get into a long sustained conflict like the Russia-Ukraine war, which has been going for 4+ years now. We can't do that here. We don't have the weapons and the ammunition for that. Where do you see this going? Do you think Trump is going to do the just walk away thing? You think he's going to do the dumb thing and try and just do a little bit, or even go big on the strike and thinking that's going to solve it? What do you think's coming?
I don't know. I mean, I find this keeps me up at night, as I'm sure it does you as well, Danny. I mean, I would think that saner minds in the U.S. would recognize that this is actually the time to make a deal. I don't know that we have the competence at the highest levels of power in the United States to make that a reality. And so if that's true, because the Iranians are not going to just go for some half-baked thing where, Trump tweets this, they tweet this, we have a 2-pager, and Iran transfers its enriched uranium out of the country. That's not going to happen. So what does it mean? It means that there either has to be a phased deal, which is what the Iranians are essentially putting on the table, where you first have resolution to the naval blockade, then you figure out something for the Strait, and then you start a multi-month long-term process of negotiations. I'd be surprised if Trump has the patience or will to do that, but that would probably be the ideal situation for the United States, for Iran, and for the world. Second thing could be that Trump thinks that, look, we got to do a little bit more bombing. And I think they would be miscalculating if they think Iran is just going to absorb it and choreograph a kind of proportionate response. I think the Iranians would take that as, we need to respond very, very forcefully to it. And then the third scenario, or I guess there's 4. The third scenario is really heavy resumption of bombing and attacks, and then it's world on fire. Fourth is Trump does some scenario, which some Iranians have told me is the most likely, that he kind of wants it to just kind of fizzle out. It's semi-unresolved. Maybe there's some limited understanding reached with Iran for a détente or a truce, and there's promises that eventually we're going to talk. But the reality is that the U.S. reverts to kind of trying to slowly strangle Iranian society into an uprising. Maybe that's going to happen. I'd be a fool if I sat here and told you which of those four I think is most likely. I pray that we don't see a resumption of military action, because I think it would be catastrophic for the entire world. And the ball is very much in the U.S. court right now.
And, I guess that no matter which of those four things come out, I don't see any scenario, and you tell me if you think I'm wrong, to where we're going to come out of this less bad than where we went into it. And there's no resolution to where Iran doesn't get something that it wants, meaning Trump will have to, for the first time ever, give something away to the Iranian side.
Oh, there is no question that the American people have been lied into yet another war. And on a tactical reality, the United States was probably in its best position since Trump tore up the 2015 deal back in 2018 to win extensive concessions from Iran. I think the Iranians came really ready to do a comprehensive deal that would have made Trump look really, really good. As of February 27th, I think that what was on the table was Trump was on the precipice. If he was smart enough not to ruin it, would have been something very, very far-reaching with Iran. What has happened now is that the U.S. it looks like a fool in front of the world. The Iranians consistently have unmasked Trump as a complete liar, incapable of even being in control of his own foreign policy. And now the Iranians feel that they have more leverage than they ever have had, perhaps since 2015 and the negotiations that led to the JCPOA. The Iranians feel now like they are able to set certain terms. Whether or not they're going to put everything back on the table that was there before this war began is an open question. That should be stunning to every American. If the entire intent of this was to win concessions out of Iran, and the story is that this war made it less likely that that would happen, what does that say about the president's duty to protect the interests of the United States? It says that those weren't the priority at all.
Yeah, that's the only conclusion that rationally you can come to. Well, listen, I guess like you, we'll all wait to find out which of those four options ends up playing out, but probably won't have to wait very long to find out. And we'll be watching anxiously along with you. We just remind people, we talked about it a little bit in this show here, Dropside News. It's one of the best ones out there, folks, because they actually do care about what the reality is, and they don't play favorites here. They just tell you what's true. That's Dropside News, and there you see it on there, dropsidenews.com. Thank you very much for coming on. We always appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, everybody.
And we will see you guys back in about 30 minutes. We're going to kind of do an update on the Russia-Ukraine war. That's been kind of put on the back burner, but that war is still going on too. And there's now kind of a nexus between this one. We'll be talking about that at 3:30 p.m. today on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. You know, we don't have sponsors because we hate to hit you over the head with ads. I don't like them. So show a little love back. Subscribe, like, and send this to somebody you care about.